Hello, this is Dr. L. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk about variables and arithmetic operations. So we'll talk about what is a variable. Let's look at the objective. So we are going to talk about variables. We'll talk about what is a variable. We'll talk about primitive data type, and then we'll also talk about arithmetic operators. Okay, so what's a variable? Basically, it's a name storage location in the computer's memory. So if you want to store some data in your program, then you will use what we call a variable. And it basically means that you can actually change the data that is stored at a particular memory location in your program. So it's not going to be fixed, and that's why it's called variable. Then you can also have literal, so basically, which means that it's a fixed value. So if I write 4 in my program, that's a literal. But if I use a name of a variable, then basically it's a variable. So 4 is a fixed value. So 4 is always going to be 4. I can't really change it. Okay. Now how many variables do I need? Basically that's kind of defined by a programmer. So if I need to store 4 different pieces of information, then I will have 4 different variables. If I need to store 10 different pieces of information, then I'll have 10 different variables. Okay. So let's see how does it really work. So here's a kind of a very simple program. Basically start with my first line is a comment. So it says this program has a variable, and then the second line is basically my class header. So it says the name of my class is variable, and of course I have a header for my main method. Now if you look at the line which says int value, that's where this is what I'm doing is I'm actually declaring my variable. So int is the type of the data that I can store in that variable, and the value is the name of the variable. Okay. um, so in this case, and then we'll talk about what's an different data types, like what's an int, and what kind of data I can store in there. We'll also talk about how do you actually name variables, what are the rules. So there are different rules that we need to follow when we name variables, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Okay, so this is my declaration, and this is where I'm actually assigning or storing a value in my variable. So now that means the location in the memory which is labeled value will have a data value of 5. So 5 is a number which is stored in that particular location. This is kind of displaying, basically, we talked about this in the last tutorial. So it kind of displays, first it's going to display this string, and then it's going to display now remember, it's not going to display value, but it's going to actually display the data that is stored at this particular location. Make sure that when you actually do this, you don't put this in the quotation mark, because otherwise it won't work. And then I'm actually going to show you, when we'll write some Java code, I will show you what happened if I put this value in the double quotation mark. Okay. So let's before we actually talk about different data type, I want to briefly talk about how do we name things. So we can use names for classes, we can use names for variables, we can use names for method. We have not talked about methods in too much detail, but later on we'll actually talk about this. Right now the only method that we have talked about is the main, and its name is always going to be main, so we won't worry about it too much. So basically we kind of focus on the naming our classes and variable. Okay, so here are some of the rules. Number one, your names. So when I say identifiers, they are just the names of your variables, name of your class, name of your method, and things like that. It cannot contain Java keywords. Now there are some keywords like public, class, void, static. Those are all the keywords. And so I cannot really name any variable which is same as the name as one of the keyword. Okay, so that's one of the rule. Second rule is that your name can contain any letter from A to Z, either lowercase or uppercase. It can contain any digit from 0 to 9. It can contain an underscore sign, and it can contain a dollar sign. So I can use any of those characters in naming my variables as well as naming my class. The third rule says that the first character may not be a digit. So that means I cannot start the name with a number. So that means the name must either start with a letter, underscore sign, or the dollar sign. And then of course the identifiers are case sensitive, so when I kind of look at those two name, I can see that there's an uppercase O, and everything in this name is kind of lowercase, so they are two different. There are two different names. Okay, so so if I spell, if if I use this name and then I try to use this name, then of course it's not going to work. So I have to make sure that I kind of follow. I use the same casing every time when I want to use a particular variable. Then identifiers cannot include spaces. So I cannot have a space between my letter. Okay. Now variable names should be descriptive. So when I kind of look at the name of variable, I can kind of guess what kind of data it's going to store. That makes it kind of easier for someone else to read it. So if I name a variable tr, it doesn't really tell me what tr is. But if I name a variable text rate, then it tells me that probably it kind of I'm going to use this variable to store the text rate. So we want our program to be kind of self-documenting. Okay, so we want someone to look at the names of the variables and name of the class and figure out what that particular class is going to do or what that variable is going to store. Now there's some other kind of conventions about naming naming things in Java. Number one, your variable name should always start with lowercase letter. And if there are multiple words, then of course we'll use the title case. So like in this case, I have three words: CA, text, and rate. So my CA start with lowercase, my text start with uppercase, and then rate start with uppercase. Name, there's only one word, so it start with the lowercase. In the same way, the class should always use title case. So if there's only one word, then it will start with the uppercase. If there are multiple words, then each of the words will start with uppercase letter. Okay. Okay. Now, what about the data type? So in Java, there are 8 data types. These are what we call primitive data types. So they are kind of built into the language. So number one. Okay. So let's actually kind of talk about what are the different types. So I have my byte, short, int, and long. So these all 4 types actually can store the same kind of the data that can actually store whole number or integers. Okay. Now what's the difference? Basically, it's the amount of memory that is allocated for the storage. So byte is the smallest one and it can only store very small numbers. Short is a little bit bigger than byte and it can store bigger numbers and so on. And int can store even bigger numbers. Okay, and I'm not going to actually go and talk about what the ranges of numbers are. You can actually go and look it up, but that's not really important. The main thing that I really want you to remember is that whenever we want to store a whole number in integer, we are always going to use int as a data type. Okay. Okay, so let's go to the next one, float and double. So float and double can be used to store numbers or real numbers. So that means they have the decimal part. And again, what's the difference between float and double? They are kind of they have a different amount of storage, and they can store different size of the numbers. So float can store smaller numbers and double can store bigger numbers. And again, for our purpose, we'll always use double. So int and double. Okay, so let's talk about boolean and char. What's a boolean and char? Okay, actually, what? Let's hold on to that and we'll talk about boolean and char in just a minute. So how do we declare a variable? So it always starts with a data type and then the name. So when I can look at this variable can store an integer data type and the name of the variable is speed. So if I try to store like a real number or a number with a decimal part, that will be an error. In the same way, here's another one. The name of my variable is distance, and it can store a double data type. That means it can store a real number. That means it can store a number with a decimal part. Boolean is basically, and then Boolean and we'll kind of talk about this in just a minute. What's a Boolean? So again, data type and the name, data type and the name. Okay, so let's talk about the Boolean data type. So a Boolean data type can have actually 2 possible values. So it can store a true or a false. So it's just like a flag. So the flag is up or flag is down. So so sometimes when we want to make decisions, we want to kind of use Boolean data type, and then we'll talk about this when in the next tutorial. Or maybe next week we'll actually go into detail about how do you actually make decision in your Java program, and that's where we'll again going to go back and kind of visit our Boolean data type. Um, so another important thing is that when you do true and false, they are not enclosed in double quotes, so they should be written as true and false. Again, this true and false are kind of the what we call keywords in Java. Okay. The last data type is the char. So your chars are literals that are enclosed in the single code. So like I have a, now remember there's only one of them, so there's only one character. Okay, and they are kind of enclosed in the single code. Now these are different from the string which actually enclosed in the double code. So here's the question, when I kind of look at this data type, I don't see any string in here, because string is not what we call a primitive data type, but it's what we call an object or a class. And we'll talk about string in sometime in the next week. So we'll actually later on we'll talk about that. So right now we are going to kind of in this tutorial, we'll just talk about int and double. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about some of the arithmetic operators. So there are like four of them. Plus sign is addition, minus is subtraction. Now it's really important that you don't put an x, but you put an asterisk, which is a multiplication, and then the slash is division. Okay. Now all our operators are binary operators, so that means they need two operands. So like if you want to add two numbers, then of course you have to have two numbers that you want to add. You want to subtract, then you have two numbers that you want to subtract, and so on. Okay. Each operator have a left and the right operand. Actually, this should say operand, not an operator. Um, so that means that when I have a plus sign, it has two numbers, a left number and the right number. Um, and most of the arithmetic operator work as one aspect, except for the integer division. So like if I do an integer division, if I divide an integer by an integer, I'm going to get an integer. And then I'm going to show you examples in just a minute, like how it is different, how your integer division is different from the real number division. And and so we'll kind of work on some of the Java code related to that. So let's actually go to JGraph and try some of these variables and see how it works. Okay, so I'm going to start a new class, um, and I'm going to okay. So I start my class. Okay, let's actually go and save it. So now I got my variables.java over here. Start my class. I call it variable. So as I said, that your class names is always going to start with uppercase. And then I have my method, main method. Okay, so when I declare my variable, so let's kind of declare some variable. Now you can actually declare more than one variable on the line. So I can say, okay, let's actually change this to something else. We'll change this to something else right now. Okay, value 2, value 3, and so on. Okay, and then let's call this value 4, value 5, value 6. Okay. Okay. Now it's really important that we remember that value 1 and value 2, value 3 can only contain integer numbers. Value 4, value 5, value 6 can contain double. Okay. So let's actually assign some value. Value 1 equal to, let's say, 14. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually output this data so that I know that it's really working. So I'm going to say print ln value 1. Okay, so let's compile this. Oh, okay, now what's happening? So let's see, there is an error. And what does it says? Public static void main, because I mistyped my string, so it cannot really find it. So I have to make sure that I put it with the I type it, and I name it using the uppercase S. Okay, so let's save it again. Let's compile it. Hopefully it will work. Oops. Okay, now what's wrong with it? Okay, so what's wrong with it? So I left out my dot in there. So see, now most of the time, like it's kind of really, your error messages are kind of very self-explanatory. So if it will tell you exactly what might be wrong, so it kind of point that out. Okay, so let's fix this. Let's kind of recompile it. Yeah, it worked. Okay, so let's run this, and it's going to display. Oops. And it displays the data that is stored in value. Now it's really important that when you kind of type this, you don't put a double quotation mark in there. So what happens if I put this value one in a double quotation mark? So let's actually try that too. Let's clear this out. And then actually just print value 1. Now this is not what we really want. We want to display the data that is stored in this particular location. Okay, so this is not what you want. So make sure that you don't, so if you have a name of a variable, you don't enclose it in a double quote. Just type it as it is. Okay, now there is another thing. Let's actually try another one. So I'm going to say value 2 is equal to 14.5. So now I know that value 2 is an integer, so I cannot really do this. So what happens if I type something like that? So let's kind of try to compile this and see, so it gives me an error, and it says incompatible type because I'm trying to store a real number, a number with a decimal part in a variable which can only store integer. So it doesn't really work. Okay, so let's actually go back and fix it. I'm going to say 15. Okay, so now let's actually, let's actually, yeah, let's just keep them as there. Okay, so I'm going to actually display the second number data right after that. Okay, so, and I'm going to say value 2. Compile this. Go to a run, clear and run it. And I can see those two numbers. Now, when I kind of display those numbers, it doesn't really say what does 14 is, what does 15 is. So sometimes you want to kind of include a message with that. So what I can do is I can actually type a string in there. So I can say the first number is, okay. Now when I type a plus sign over here, this is not an addition sign, but it's basically what it's going to do. It's going to take this string and it's going to combine the data which is stored in value 1 and it's going to display it as on one single line. Okay, so let's actually do the same thing with the second output. So I'm going to do this, I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it over here, and I'm going to say the second number is value 2. Okay, so I'm going to actually, I have to make sure that I put that plus sign in there. So let's compile this and then see how it is displayed. Okay, clear this out, run this, And see, now it makes more sense that the first number is 14 and the second number is 15, because if I just say 14 and 15, then the user might not really know what a 14 and 15 is. Okay. Now before, I'm going to actually talk about the double instrument. Let's actually try some arithmetic operation. Let's try addition. Okay. So let's see what happened. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to display the output. And I'm going to display value 3 over there. And yeah, sure, 14 plus 15 is 29. So I can actually try different things in there. So I can okay, let's actually do some more calculations. So I'm going to do, so this is my addition, and then I'm going to try my subtraction. And then let's also try multiplication. Okay, let's run this thing and let's compile this. Go to our run window, clear this out, and then run this. So the sum of the numbers is 14 plus 15 is 29. The difference is 14. Now remember that this is the first operand, so this is actually, I'm doing 14 minus 15, so 14 minus 15 is minus 1, and then 14 multiplied by 15 is 210. Now sometimes it's kind of really hard to read this, so we can actually put like blank lines in there. So how do I put blank lines? So what we do is we can actually have something like so we can have just a print statement without anything, then it's what's it going to do, it's going to kind of print a blank line in there. So I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to paste it over here, and then I'm going to paste it over here too. Okay, let's actually compile this again, and then let's try it again. So see, this way kind of display kind of looks nicer, because you have like blank lines in there. Okay, now what about the division? So let's actually try some division. Uh, before I try division, there's one more thing. I don't really have to use variables in my operation all the time. I can actually also use numbers in there. So for example, I can say, let's actually do one more thing. Okay, let's actually do the addition. So I can say 14, for example. Okay, and then what it's going to do, it's going to take the value 1 and it's going to add 14 to it. Okay, so 14 plus 14 is 28. So I can also do that. Now what about division? So now division is a little bit tricky in when we are dealing with integers. So let's try a division. So okay, so I'm going to do, so I'm just going to do 4 divided by 2. Okay, and I'm going to just say, Okay, so let's run this. And of course, when I kind of do 4 divided by 2, I get 3, which makes sense, right? What about if I do 4 divided by 3? So let's, so when I divide 4 by 3, I get 1.333, but because it's an integer, so my result is going to be just 1. Now what happens if I divide a number by a bigger number? So let's say, for example, if I divide 4 by 8. Okay, so let's go and run this. So in this case, I got a 0 because 4 divided by 8 is basically like 8 goes 0 times in 4, so my result is 0. Okay, now let's actually try some of these with our double. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to again do the same kind of thing, and I'm going to assign some data to my value 4, value 5, value 6. Sorry, I'm going to assign some data to value 4 and value 5, and then I'm going to do different operations on them. Okay, so let's say value 4 equal 15.6, and then value 5 equal 5.2. Okay, let's say 5.3. Let's make it 5.3. Okay, and then I'm going to do all my display the stuff, and then I'm going to do all my arithmetic operation. So I'm going to copy and paste this. The first number is value 4, and then this is value 5, and then I'm going to say addition value 6, and then I'm going to add 4 and 5. Okay, so then do the same thing over here, subtraction. Okay, so we got an error. So what's going on? Find symbol value. Okay, oops. And you can see that because I typed uppercase B in there, so it was not able to find it because I never declared it. So in Java we have to make sure that we declare our variables before we actually use them. So I didn't declare it, so basically it was not able to find the value with the uppercase B. So that's why that was an error. Okay, so let's compile it again. Oops, one more error. Okay, so what is that? So what's going on? Okay, it cannot. Oh, okay. I have to make sure that I change this to 6 and then change this to 6 because I'm doing the calculation with double, so my result is also going to be double. So I have to make sure that I see okay, this 4 5 6 4 5 6. Okay, 6 4 5 and then 6. Okay, 4 5 6 4 5 6. Okay, let's compile it again. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with getting an error in your when you compile your program. So even I make a lot of mistakes. That's normal. I mean that's how you learned actually. Okay, so let's run this. Okay, so let's look at the, so I have two numbers, 15.6 and 5.3, and when I add them up I get 20.9. If I take the difference I get 10.3. If I multiply them then I get 82.6799. Now why do we have all this nines? Because the way the numbers are stored in the computer, they're not very precise, and sometimes you might end up getting extra digit in that. So basically it's kind of when you will round this, you will get actually the correct result. Okay, now uh, the sum. Okay, so why is there under the sum there? Okay, let's see. Okay, so I did it actually twice. Okay, so let's actually get rid of the, or maybe we can just leave it in there. It doesn't really matter. And then when I did the division, and I got so a real number or a double divided by a double will actually give you a double. Okay, so I suggested you actually try it. Try creating your own variables, and then storing different numbers and doing different arithmetic operations. So I hope this will help you when you will this will help you with doing your homework. And that's it for variables, and then I will see you in the next tutorial.